Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call. 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624 or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my trusty co-host, Steve Ovens. Welcome to the program, sir.
Hey, Noah. How's your week going?
Oh, it has been fantastic. I haven't had to travel this week, so there's been no crazy scheduling stuff. It's just been get up and do work, which is kind of a change for me from the past. We'll get straight into the feedback this hour. Aaron writes in and he says, "Hi, Noah. I'm writing into you today to ask about Thunderbolt docks. I know in a previous episode, I remember you mentioning that you use a Lenovo Thunderbolt dock, but I don't remember the model. I'm a fan of Lenovo, and as a recent switcher to the Frameworks laptop for my trusty T440, I'm in need of a new dock with Thunderbolt support. I've looked online at a few docks, but I'm hesitant to buy one that's not guaranteed to work with Linux. As I run Kubuntu 2104 on the Framework laptop, any help or ideas or suggestions on the matter would be awesome. Cheers, Aaron." So I have routinely, so first of all, I have tried probably every Thunderbolt dock out there. I've tried all of the Dells. I've tried the OWC one that's primarily set up for Macs. And the one that I've landed on time and time again, regardless of the make or model computer that you're using it with, is the Thunderbolt dock. Now, or the Lenovo Thunderbolt dock. So I wish there was a more fancy model name for the Lenovo Thunderbolt dock, but really they just call it the Lenovo USA Thunderbolt 3 dock. And then now they have the Lenovo ThinkPad Thunderbolt dock Gen 2. Now here's what I really like about the Gen 2 over the Gen 1. The Gen 1 had the displays ganged together. So the most you could drive was 2 displays. Now, I believe, not that I've tested, but I believe there are 2 independent displays, so you can have DisplayPort, HDMI, and then on the remaining 2 display ports, where there's one's DisplayPort and one is HDMI, those are then ganged together. So I think they've added a third display that you can drive off of your laptop. Now, I ordered the Gen 2. It's here. It's sitting in the Altispeed Technology sandbox. I've not unpacked it or played with it yet, so I don't know that for sure. But here's what I can tell you for sure. If you're looking for a Thunderbolt dock that is going to work flawlessly under Linux, then the Lenovo one is definitely the one you want to go with. I was actually having a conversation with Steve when I was at his house. I walked into his office area and I noticed he was using a desktop, and we had a short conversation on his choice of a desktop. And the reason I asked him that was because I have switched from using a desktop to only using Thunderbolt devices. So I have Thunderbolt on my work laptop, I have Thunderbolt on my personal laptop, and then I have a standby Thunderbolt laptop that stays at my house. And so when I just walk downstairs into my room and want to do work, there's the standby one that's there and it's connected and everything just works. But when I need to get some work done, I can disconnect that computer and I can plug in my Thunderbolt work laptop, and now takes over both my 2K displays, my keyboard, my mouse, my good speakers. All the things are just automatically connected. And then I have a second Thunderbolt dock behind me. So I've got 2 workstations. And so if I have my personal computer on one and my work computer on the other, I can just spin my chair around and use both of them. And then when I travel, I actually have I have a Thunderbolt dock and a small little portable desk that I take with me. And so if I'm going to be at a client deployment for a week or 2, I'll take that and I'll set it up there. All of those are using Lenovo Thunderbolt 3 docks, as well as that's what we've given to all of our tech guys at Altispeed, and nobody has had an issue with it. We recently served a client. They're an engineering firm, and they actually went out and purchased a bunch of ThinkPads and a bunch of ThinkPad Thunderbolt docks. And so all of their people, when they come in the morning, they dock their laptop, they plug it in. By the way, they're all running Linux. Plug in their Linux laptops, away they go, and they work off of their Thunderbolt docks all day. It was the first time ever, by the way, I've ever gone to a client site and been able to dock and have 2 screens and a keyboard, a mouse, and a monitor, and wired Ethernet, and the whole 9 yards. Very cool. Works flawlessly with every distribution of Linux I've ever used with it, as well as we have a client using MacBooks, and we've connected a bunch of MacBooks to the Thunderbolt Lenovo docks and had no issues with them either. So check it out. We'll have a link for you for the Gen 2 in the show notes. You can learn more at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Our second email comes in from Mark. Mark writes in and says, Noah, I'm a longtime listener of the show's podcast. I never miss a week. Thank you so much for the hard work to make this happen on a regular basis. I'm currently helping my church with a new building project, and I have a couple of questions about wireless access points. The church's sanctuary will seat about 220 with an additional 75 children in their department. We are thinking about putting 2 wireless access points in the sanctuary, which will serve as data for the use of the congregation, as well as consist of some social media and some mobile access for sermon notes. Additionally, we are thinking about placing 1 wireless access point in the entry hall for a portable special event check-in kiosk, and then placing a 4th wireless access point in the main hall leading up to the children's area for the department's check-in kiosk. What are your recommendations for access points? Will 2 access points in the sanctuary handle the congregate's demands? The longest run for PoE will be around 150 feet, and I believe that distance is close to the limit over Cat 6. Will that distance be problematic? Do you have any additional input that comes to mind for our project? Thanks again for the great show. Blessings, Mark in Florida. So, couple things there. First of all, as far as models go, I would highly recommend the Unify UAP-AC Pros. Those are managed access points. So what that means is you will either spin up a cloud controller, or you can purchase what they call the cloud key, which is essentially the controller running on a tiny little ARM board. The nice thing about that is when you go to use the access points, all you have to do is configure the controller one time, and it will push all those changes out to all of your access points. Whereas if you have independently managed access points, you have to log into each one and modify the settings. As far as putting 2 access points in your sanctuary, really what you're looking for, the correct answer is you want 20 dB of signal separation between each access point. And so the best way to do that is to download a little app called Wi-Fi Analyzer on your smartphone, and you would place 1 access point up, and then you would go over to where you think you want to place the next access point and hold your phone up and get a reading on it. Now, if you want some distance to kind of spitball to get you started, I would recommend about 50 feet. In a wide open area, that's about the spacing that you're going to need to get the separation that you need. Now, if you don't have that much space, I wouldn't recommend putting a second access point in there, because if you put 2 access points too close together, the crosstalk, the interference, the noise between the 2 is actually going to cause more problems than it's going to help. Additionally, those access points, the Unify UAP AC Pros, are good up to 250 clients per access point. So unless, if you said your sanctuary seats 220 people, the chances that isn't going to handle everyone is slim to none. As far as placing access points outside the entry hall and the check-in, again, without seeing it, if you were to send a blueprint diagram to help@altaspeed.com, we would take a look at it for you, and we could give you maybe some more detailed information on that's a good placement, not good placement. But again, what you're looking for is 20 dB of signal separation. And so when you start to get much more than that, then what you're going to deal with is a problem with handoff. So in the Unify system, when you roam from one access point to the other, in other words, the person is walking around with their phone and they walk out of the sanctuary and they walk into the hallway, if they get below 70 dB, it's going to drop off of one access point rather than gracefully hand them over to another one. And so if they're on a call or they're streaming video or something like that, it's going to drop. So that's not really desirable. So we kind of want to stay in that sweet range. And I can't really tell you that without seeing a building schematic. But what I can tell you is that if you're just trying to get isolated Wi-Fi coverage in this area, in the sanctuary, in the check-in area, putting 4 access points there will work just fine. I would also be interested, just as a kind of a follow-up, are you using Planning Center for your check-in? Not that it matters for your question. I'm just personally curious, so I'd be interested in hearing that. You ask about the distance of Cat 6, and so 150 feet is well within the capability of Cat 6. In fact, the distance limit for Cat 6 is 100 meters, so that's about 300 feet. So you could actually go almost twice that distance without any problems. Now, Steve, you've heard some really great things about the TP-Link access points. Tell me about those.
So a lot of the let's say the influencers out there have been kind of pushing away from Unify for various reasons, which I did want to bring up just a point of clarification. So just because their thing is called the cloud key doesn't mean that you actually have to manage things in the cloud. I have a Unify stuff here and I run it on a VM that has no access to the internet. But getting back to the TP-Link question, when Unify went and changed their terms of service so that they were starting to gather more metrics about your network, people started to react very negatively to that. And so TP-Link essentially is very good at cloning the best parts of various competitors. And so their brand Amada has really started to pick up the spillover from people who are unhappy with Unify. Now, I haven't used it myself, partly because I already bought into the Unify system, but I did take a look at it, and I think that they look priced competitively, and I've watched several comparisons, and I think, point for point, they're really close.
Yeah, we've heard really good things about them on the show, too. A couple people have written in and talked about their experience, so definitely something to check out. I also have not used them, and as I've talked to other people that do larger deployments, I've not heard of anyone switching to those. The people that I have heard feedback from are usually using them in smaller environments. And so it'd be interesting to get some real world data on, a few hundred users working off of these things. But if you do go that route, let us know. If you do need any help, we're always happy to serve you. And so if you need something more than I can answer here on a 5-minute radio call, then give us a call. Give customer care a call at 866-280-1433 or send an email to support@altispeed.com, and one of my team members would be happy to take care of you. Our third email comes in from Eric. Eric writes in and says, "Hey, Noah, I've been watching your show for a while, and I appreciate your views of hosting your own. Everything. I concur and love being in control of my infrastructure. I currently have a single Cisco standalone 802.11n access point. I would like to upgrade to 2 access points. However, all I'm finding is cloud managed. I want the ability of 802.11ax Wi-Fi 6. I want VLANs per SSID. I want more coverage. I want handoffs when devices are moved around, and I want it managed on my own server. What access points would you suggest? Cost-wise, under $300 per access point would be awesome. Thanks for your help." So I'm going to reiterate what Steve said. Unify's product marketing is not really ideal here. They call it the cloud key when, in fact, it's literally the opposite of a cloud key. What they're trying to tell you is that it's all of the features of the cloud brought into a small little key that you put in your house, or business. But it literally all it is a tiny little ARM computer, much like a Raspberry Pi, running Debian, and on top of that, the Unify controlling software on it. And so, again, if you went the Unify route, you could purchase that. It would be entirely self-hosted. You could also run the controller like Steve does inside of a VM. That would work just fine. If you're looking for, I'm going to throw out another brand or another suggestion. Now, that will meet your $300 per access point. If you say to me, "Hey, I am uncomfortable with what Unify is doing, and I'm looking for something else," you might also look at Ruckus. And Ruckus is substantially more expensive than Unify. But some of the limitations that you run into with Unify is they only allow 4 SSIDs on an access point. Now, there are some ways that you can cheat around that, but in general, Unify only supports 4 SSIDs. And so the problem is if you have more than 4 VLANs that you need exposed over an SSID and you don't specify here, then we're going to have a problem. Ruckus has no such issue. In fact, Ruckus has a rather cool, unique issue or feature where you can specify a different pre-shared key that you give out to different people. And depending on what pre-shared key they use, it will, with one SSID, will drop them onto different VLANs. So for example, if I have the first passphrase, Ask Noah Show, it might put me on the Ask Noah Show VLAN. If I have the second passphrase, Altispeed, it puts me on the Altispeed VLAN, even though I'm connected to wireless network as my SSID. Both users are. But just depending on what password you use, it'll put you onto a different VLAN. So those are, and they don't have any limit on how many SSIDs or VLANs you can tie to that. So it's a little bit more of an advanced system. The problem is the access points start at like $1,000. And then on top of that, I don't know of them sending any network data back, but they do require a subscription fee to continue to get software updates. Now, the device will continue to work if you don't pay for it. So it's not like it's a service per se, but you won't get firmware updates for your device. And so then that leaves you vulnerable to attack and stuff like that. So anyway, hopefully that gives you some options. Steve, anything I'm missing with his 802.11ax, Wi-Fi 6, VLANs per SSID and handoffs?
No, I think that's pretty much where I landed. I dropped a link in the show notes for the UniFi AP6 Lite, because he didn't really specify any kind of specific requirements. So the Lite comes in at about $100, and you could easily deploy a couple of those. And so I'd check out the Lite, and then you could move to the full. And again, I'm kind of biased here because I am in the UniFi ecosystem.
Yeah, me too.
So, I mean, take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, but you know what, though? I've been happy with them, and you can get around those network statistics. I think they actually do have a UI button, but even when they didn't, you could SSH in and modify. There was a config file you could modify to prevent it from doing that. And the other thing is, with a little bit of network know-how too, right? So all of my stuff, and it doesn't matter if it's UniFi, it doesn't matter if it's Access, it doesn't matter what the manufacturer is, unless that thing needs to get out to the internet, I don't let it get out to the internet. It just talks around my local network. And that's true of almost all devices in my house. If they don't have a reason to talk on the internet, I just don't let them. So an access point is perfectly capable of passing through VLAN traffic that's going to the internet without itself ever having a default gateway. That's something to keep in mind as well. Our fourth email comes in from Rick. Rick writes in and says, "Hello. I've listened to all of the episodes since the Ask Noah show began. I appreciate the time and energy that goes into each and every episode and the focus on Linux and open source. My workstations and notebooks at work, at home, are all various Linux distros. I've been in IT for a long time, but I haven't had a lot of experience with audio. After my previous company was sold, the IT department was outsourced, and I found a great nonprofit organization which does some amazing work in the community. I'm now the IT manager, but I also in the IT department. It couldn't be a better fit for me. This year, I moved the company off its self-hosted PBX system onto a cloud one. This is where my project comes in and where I need some input. I now have a bunch of unused copper running to every hall and office and conference room. Using the wires of the Cat6 solid core, I soldered together some adapters which plug into RJ11 jacks. On one end, I have a 3.5-inch male audio connector, and on the other end, an RJ11 connector. Now I can use any of our old PC speakers and run them into adapters which plug into the RJ11 wall jacks. From the 66 blocks, I've soldered together a bunch of different adapters. One end has a male 3.5-inch audio connector, and the other I've left bare and punched down into the 66 block. For a server, I'm experimenting with Dark Ice and Icecast on an Ubuntu server at AirSonic on Docker. As far as I can tell, only plug in one at a time and the server's audio card. Currently, I've completed 2 lines. However, I'm not receiving audio on the speakers. I'm convinced I need an amplifier to push the signal through that much copper, but I don't know what hardware I need to procure to connect to the 66 blocks. Currently, I'm terminating 3.5 connectors with the server's audio card, mixer, amp, switch. My question is, what hardware do I need to bridge the gap and connect that many lines to an audio server in the 66 block to boost the signal? Cost is a factor, so I'm hoping with your experience and your understanding of audio and the audio hardware, you can either tell me I'm way off base and this isn't going to work, or what hardware I can use to make this project take off. Thanks in advance, Rick. So let's start here. We'll start with your wiring and work our way back to how we feed into the wiring. So if you're going to send a signal down a set of wires, the first decision you have to make if you're going to use unbalanced or a balanced signal. And over that kind of distance, you absolutely want to be using a balanced signal. So what's the difference? Well, if we take 2 wires and we send a signal down just one of the wires, obviously that wire, after it gets long enough, begins to act as an antenna and starts to pick up spurious noise, which of course is then introduced into the speaker. And that's why you hear very commonly you'll hear an AC 60 hertz hum, or you'll hear a local radio station or something like that. So what we do is we take 2 wires and we send the signal across both wires, and then we invert the signal. Now you might say, what is the purpose of inverting the signal? Well, the reason is because on the receiving end, we're going to flip that inverted signal back into its original orientation. But because both copies of the signal picked up the same noise as they traveled along that cable, the noise is identical on the two wires. And so flipping the polarity of what arrives at the receiving end will produce the original signal without the noise. And so this is how all professional audio places, if they're running wires over long distance, and I've seen radio stations and music studios and all sorts of things where they run hundreds of feet of balanced audio wire, and what comes out on the other end is a perfect signal. So if you're sending a signal, an audio signal, an unamplified signal, this is how you would do it. So I've included in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com, there is a company called Studio Hub that makes adapters. You can just put an RJ45 end on each of your Cat 6 cables, and then you can plug into the Studio Hub adapters, and they'll give you an XLR or balanced quarter inch that you can send, so TRS. Now, if you go that route, you are going to need an amplifier on the speaker end of each side. So out of the other end of your cable, you'll have a balanced audio signal, and you'll have to plug that into an amplifier, and then you'll plug your speakers into the amplifier. Now, if you wanted one amplifier to rule them all, and you wanted the amplifier in a central location, and you wanted to use the Cat 6 as speaker wire, a couple of things. First, my word of caution, because the gauge of the wire is very small, you want to be careful that you don't burn the wire up. If you push too much power through those little wires, they're going to heat up and then they will melt. And so you want to be cautious of that. It's not really designed to be used as speaker wire. But if you're using low audio, background music, something like that, it can be done. And so what you would do in that scenario is you would either, if you wanted the same audio to go to all of the endpoints, you would use whatever you want to generate the audio. You would feed that into your amplifier, and then you would plug the bare copper wires into the speaker output of the amplifier, and thereby using the Cat 6 as speaker wire. Now you can get a little bit more fancy if you want to. Both Monoprice and B&H Photo and Video, they will have multi-channel amplifiers. And what a multi-channel amplifier will allow you to do is send a different signal to each room. So let's say the conference room doesn't want to listen to the same audio as office number 3, doesn't want to listen to the same audio as office number 5. That can actually be done with a multi-channel amplifier. Now, you've talked about a couple of different pieces of software that you've used or tried. You certainly could do that with streaming, Dark Ice, and so on and so forth. But the issue there is really those solutions are designed where you're trying to move audio across a network. If you're going either with a centralized solution, what I would do is use something like Volumio. Volumio, you can flash onto a Raspberry Pi. You can control it with a web browser, and it actually has multi-zone support. So you could purchase 4 or 5 different Raspberry Pis, flash them all with Volumio, plug them into a multi-channel audio amplifier, and now you can pull the Volumio app up or launch it in a web browser and just pick what room do you want and what do you want to play in that room. And that's likely going to work. Now, that's a very difficult thing to try to explain in a radio show. So if that doesn't make sense, then write back in, ask me a couple more questions, or give me a call at 866-280-1433, and I'll try to help you out. I would love to do that. Our 5th email comes in from Charlie. Charlie writes in and says, "G'day. I came across this program that some of the community may be interested in checking out. It's called SDR++, the open source cross-platform ham radio SDR program." And then he links to the source code. It seems to be made by an 18-year-old German student, and the program is about a year old. And so we'll have a link for you in the show notes if you are into ham radio and are interested in experimenting with doing that over software. This is a great way to do that. So we'll have a link for you in the show notes again, podcast.asknoahshow.com. Our pick of the week this week is Bash Crawl. You can learn more at gitlab.com/slackermedia/bashcrawl. Now, this is a game that teaches you the basics of using POSIX, Linux, BSD, Unix, so on and so forth. So to start playing, you open a terminal. You type in the letters CD, just like the letters, not the quotes, into the terminal. And then a space. Press the space bar. Then drag and drop the entrance directory from the folder into your terminal. If your terminal asks you what you want to do with this thing that you dragged into, you say paste location. If it doesn't ask, expect to paste the file path location of the folder that you just dragged in. Now, once you've done that, Now in your terminal, you can press enter, and the exact path varies depending on obviously where you saved this file. But once you've typed into the terminal cat scroll, you're now playing the game. And so it's a game that you can play inside of your terminal based around teaching you Bash. So I thought that would be kind of cool and definitely something you'll want to check out. Again, we'll have a link for you in the show notes. Our gadget of the week this week is the Bangle.js. This is a hackable open source smartwatch. Specifically, Bangle.js uses the open source I'm going to probably mispronounce this, Esprino JavaScript interpreter. This is a custom designed piece of software for devices with very low hardware resources like microcontrollers. Now, new apps can be written in JavaScript without an SDK or compiling additional software. They can be sent wirelessly via Bluetooth to the watch. In fact, to hack or connect to or install apps on the smartwatch, all you need is a modern web browser. So the Bangle.js is a crowdfunding campaign that is going to run on, ran through October 12th, and it's already smashed its initial crowdfunding goal. So you can pledge without reward, or you can support from 59 euros to get a watch. Shipping is going to begin in mid-November. So if I was out there looking for a smartwatch, of course, my first choice would be the Pine Time, but this is definitely a contender. It does not look like your traditional cheap Chinese knockoff watch with an Apple face or an Apple Watch face pasted on it. And the fact that you can load apps and control it and do all the things from a browser is pretty cool. So make sure to check that out. Again, we'll have a link for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. Our next guest is the CEO and founder of ProtonMail. It is Dr. Andy Yen. He's been on the program before. We're excited to welcome him back. A lot of great things coming up from ProtonMail. Both Steve and myself are ProtonMail users. Dr. Andy Yen, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome into the program, sir.
Hi, Noah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. So, Andy, I want to start with Proton Calendar. It's now available as a beta for Android. I've been playing with it as a ProtonMail subscriber, and I think it's absolutely fantastic, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this. How has the reception been, and what can we look forward to next with Proton Calendar?
Calendar is not actually out yet, so I'm glad the beta is working well for you. I think there are still some bugs that we need to iron out, so it's definitely still a work in progress. Right now, we want to try to release products out to the community as soon as possible. We do anticipate being able to do a full and proper release of Calendar, later this year. Of course, people are asking about iOS, and we hope to follow up very quickly with the full iOS release, next year.
That's fantastic. Can you talk a little bit about the technical specifications of how Calendar does or is intended to work long term? How does the encryption work? What things are private? And will calendars be able to be shared between users, and does that still maintain privacy?
Yeah, so Calendar, at the end of the day, if you look at VPN, Mail, also our Drive file storage product, Calendar is actually, from a cryptography standpoint, the most complex. And it's the most complex because we do want to have event and calendar sharing that will come in the future version. And we built a crypto system to actually support full encryption even in that even under sharing circumstances. So in Calendar, we really went sort of all the way when it comes to encryption, right? We literally encrypted everything that we could encrypt. In fact, the only thing that is not encrypted on Calendar is the time of the event. Everything else, in fact, is protected by encryption and also digitally signed. So I think it's, to my knowledge, the only calendar that takes encryption to that extreme. And it wasn't easy. So part of the reason why it's taking us so long to get it out is because you have to manage all the complexity that comes with doing all that encryption and creating calendars and events that actually can be shared without compromising the encryption.
So how does the sharing work in tandem with encryption? The events are those private keys, or is a private key exchanged with another Proton user so that they can have access to the calendar while keeping it encrypted? How does that work?
Yeah. So if you go to our blog, you can actually find a blog post that we've made, called the Calendar Security Model. And if you go through it, it actually goes, very, very much in depth into, all the crypto models, right? But To kind of give maybe the very short summary of that, the way that we're able to keep things encrypted as you pass the data around is actually as you said, using public-private key cryptography, right? That's the basis of everything that we do, and it does in fact work the same way that you can send emails around while still preserving end-to-end encryption. So yeah, we're not re-encrypting the entire calendar every single time because that would be very complex and take a lot of resources. But what we do is there are keys that do get shared in a way that doesn't allow us ever to have access.
Open source means more eyes on the code in general, but of course we need systems in place to translate those eyes into actual solutions. Tell me a little bit about the new Bug Bounty Program partnership and how you believe that's going to improve ProtonMail.
Well, the partnership is new. The Bug Bounty program is not new, right? So we've actually had a Bug Bounty program since the very beginning, in fact. I think we first launched one in 2014, so that's really quite at the very beginning of Proton. And yes, the idea right now of partnering to relaunch the Bug Bounty program is to actually get higher quality leads to come in, right? We want to try to reach the best pen testers, the best white hat hackers out there to really try to find flaws in Proton, because I think it's essential to do that. Obviously, on an annual basis, we are doing third-party security audits of our open source code, and that does provide quite a bit of security. But bug bounty programs do have value. We believe in doing that, and a lot of companies maybe would feel kind of put off if someone finds a bug in their software, but we actually do want all the bugs to be found because that's how you ensure security.
You talk about your auditing process. All of your apps are open source, and you're always looking for input on potential problems like you mentioned. You guys go out of your way to hire independent security consultants to perform regular audits, and then, of course, you release those reports to the public. Tell me a little bit about that process, and tell me what you've learned from it.
Well, the process is we essentially provide full access to not only the source code, but we actually also give them special access to be able to actually attack our API and some of the infrastructure. So we do open up a lot of access when we do these third-party audits, and they depending on the firm, they go in over the course of a couple of weeks, much like a hacker would try to do it to compromise the system, and they poke and prod, right? And we actually intentionally, lower some of our shields so that they can do the attacks, in a way that even a real attacker wouldn't be able to do, just so we can see if we can find flaws. And it's something that we do on a continual basis, once a year across our entire, suite of products, because, as time goes on, you add more code, and when you add more code, you also potentially add more bugs, and this is why it has to be a continual process.
What is surveillance-based advertising, and why do you believe that we should ban it?
Well, surveillance-based advertising is the business model that Google and Facebooks of the world have been using to really make money, right? They, on one hand, they make money. On the other hand, they are really destroying the definition of privacy as we know it. And I think before Google came along, before Facebook came along, there was advertising. It was certainly effective. Business was able to function. So I think there's very strong evidence to suggest that you don't need to do targeted advertising. You don't need to do surveillance and data collection in order to run an advertising business. So our support for that concept is simply the belief that we think advertising can be done in a more responsible way and ultimately lead to a healthier internet and healthier society.
Do you believe that there's a way to advertise or do surveillance-based advertising in a privacy-respecting way, or is it kind of an all-or-nothing thing? Either we're gathering information on people and using that to advertise to them, or we're not. Is there an in-between there at all?
Well, the in-between is kind of like DuckDuckGo, right? They're trying to kind of be, on one hand, an advertising company, but also a privacy company. And I think DuckDuckGo is proof that there is kind of a way to be in between, right? Now, this of course is subjective. My personal opinion is that there shouldn't be an in-between. And I don't want there to be an in-between, and Proton definitely isn't seeking to have an in-between, right? But I can fully respect people who try to do something in between, because at the end of the day, what DuckDuckGo is offering is still way better than what Google is offering. But myself personally, I prefer privacy, period, right? And I think that is fundamentally at odds in advertising, because advertising is simply always going to be more effective if you have more data on your audience.
Andy, back in September, there was a climate activist that was arrested and was using ProtonMail. ProtonMail was then presented with a legally binding order, which you had no choice but to comply with. Now, immediately after that situation came into the public, you guys issued a transparency report to help users understand privacy and the tools that ProtonMail provides. Can you briefly describe what happened with that situation and what were some of the resulting misconceptions that people had about ProtonMail? Did ProtonMail work as it was designed to?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And on the topic of transparency reports, those are not new. In fact, we've been publishing transparency reports since 2015. And I think the surprising thing is it turns out that until recently, no one's really bothered to read them, right? But going back to the incident itself, yeah, I think it was misunderstood in many ways. And what people don't really realize is that in this situation, Proton actually behaved and worked the way that it was meant to work. And we can really understand that by going back to look closely at the incident and what happened, right? So it's out there today. It's certainly being published, but there were suspects, in a case in France, which were charged with 3 crimes. Trespassing. They were also charged with destruction of property and also theft, right? And those obviously are also criminal offenses in Switzerland. Now, those charges seem serious, but what they were actually doing was squatting, right? And a misconception out there is that Proton somehow led to these people getting arrested. But you and I know, and everybody else knows, that by nature of squatting, the location of the suspect was not really in doubt, right? You don't need an IP address to find the location of a squatter, not particularly one that has already been arrested and evicted once before. So the identity of the suspect was well known to the police. So that really begs the question, if they already knew who the suspect was and where they were located, why were they looking to get information from Proton, right? And that's actually a question that nobody has really asked. Something that all the press in the world more or less missed. And the answer to this actually can be found in some of the police reports, right? The reason they came to Proton wasn't really to identify or find the suspect. It was actually to try to gather more corroborating evidence which they could use to build a case against the suspect. So what they really wanted was the content of the person's inbox, who he was communicating with, what they were talking about, the messages themselves. And this, had he been using Gmail, all that information would have come out, and that would have been quite incriminating, and he would probably be facing much more serious charges, right? So in a way, I think in this case, Proton really did its job, because it was proven, even under the threat of a court order, that there is no way for Proton to give out the contents of the messages that we have. And this is in fact what protected the user in this case. So in many ways, I think our product worked as expected. And for me, it's even kind of a positive thing to show that even under threat of a court order, we can prove, in fact, that our encryption cannot be undone.
How and why are VPNs treated differently than email from a legal perspective, and from your logging perspective? How are those two products different, and how are what are the privacy implications of those differences?
Email is a bit like telephone, right? It's widely considered to be a communication tool. And communication tools in all countries, not just in Switzerland, fall under different sets of regulations that have always been codified in law for a long time, right? So that's the status for email services, and it's not a Swiss thing, it's not a French thing, it's not a U.S. thing. It's just email services are considered communication tools, right? A VPN, on the other hand, isn't considered a communication tool, and this is actually where I think Proton VPN really benefits from its Swiss jurisdiction. If you look at VPNs, say, based in other countries, right? We have a lot of them. You hear of some in Sweden. You hear of many in the U.S. Actually, all the VPNs in the world out there are claiming no logs. But what they really mean is no logs until we receive, a court order, right? Or in the U.S. case, until we receive a national security letter, right? In which case, they will be obliged to log. And that comes from the nature of the technology, right? VPNs are passing user traffic. So all VPNs, of course, can be forced to log. What makes Proton VPN in Switzerland unique, though, is that under Swiss law, there is really no way today, with our current status, to compel Proton VPN to ever log. So in many ways, Switzerland actually has a much stronger, no logs guarantee for VPNs than other countries, and that's something that we definitely take advantage of for Proton VPN, right? If we go back to the case of the French suspect in this case, as people in the security industry know, there's a thing called OPSEC, right? Your operational security is extremely important, and no encryption in the world is going to be able to protect you, from being discovered if you completely neglect your OPSEC.
Let's talk a little bit about OPSEC a little bit more. One of the key things that you need to understand if you're going to try to develop an operational security model is you have to understand where your threat is coming. Where is the threat vector? So, Andy, one of the things I really appreciated about ProtonMail is, in addition to your transparency report, in which you guys came out and said, hey, if there was a misconception on how our products and services work, we want to clarify that because we want you to be an informed consumer. And that was certainly appreciated as somebody who swears by ProtonMail. But then you went above and beyond that. You've started publishing a series of blog posts called Decrypting Privacy. And in it, one of the first things that you talk about is identifying what a threat model is. So, Andy, could you briefly describe what is a threat model, and what are some common models, and what are your suggestions to thwart those common threat models?
Yeah, happy to discuss about this. So, of course, in the wake of the incident with the French suspect, we really went back to think, okay, how can we better protect, activists, journalists, and people on our services that are trusting us, right? And one of the first thing I think that's very important to kind of for people to remember is there's a difference between privacy and anonymity, right? Privacy is in many countries a constitutional protected right. There is no constitutional right to anonymity, right? And also, if you have a service that grants you privacy, the granting of privacy is not really the same thing as immunity from law enforcement, right? Just because a service is private doesn't mean that it's going to go out there and say police, right? It's not possible. It's not realistic. It's never going to happen. So at the end of the day, it's not that Proton didn't do its best to protect privacy. It's that people fundamentally must misunderstand what is the meaning of privacy, the difference between privacy and being anonymous, and this really comes down to threat modeling and education, right? So I think the best way to protect and empower people is really to educate them, and threat modeling is where you start. So that's why it's the first post in the Privacy Decrypted series, because if you want to stay safe, before you can even try to stay safe, you need to understand, what am I trying to protect myself from, right? Because the protections that you will use will depend on what you need protection from, right? I would argue that most of our users are not engaged in destruction of property or theft, and it probably isn't in their threat model to hide from the Swiss police, right? And if you understand that, then you will know that ProtonMail offers you a great protection for what you need to do, right? Now, if you do have that type of threat model where you need enhanced protection, and again, we only condone the usage of ProtonMail for legal reasons, right? Legal purposes. It's against our terms and conditions to use ProtonMail for illegal purposes, right? But let's say you did need to, hide from the government. Then, if that's part of your threat model, then of course you must use Tor and VPN. And it's really letting people think about threat models, understanding how they work. It's only through that process that they can take the appropriate means to be secure. Because at the end of the day, if people are using ProtonMail and throwing all caution to the wind, there's nothing that we as a service can do to protect them from themselves.
Absolutely, but you guys are committed to giving people the right information, and I want to thank you for that. Tell me a little bit about Privacy Decrypted. What specifically is it? How can it help users use ProtonMail more securely?
The thing about Privacy Decrypted is it's not specific to Proton or ProtonMail, right? We want to do something in general. So let's put it this way: it's terrible for advertising for our own services because we don't really make it specifically about Proton, but it's really about general education, general knowledge, right? At the end of the day, privacy is an extremely complex topic, right? From the regulatory and legal standpoint, it's complex. The technology is extremely complicated. Of course, we're trying to simplify that, but we're talking complex concepts here. And at the same time, it is a topic that is ever more relevant to all of our lives. We live our lives today having our privacy infringed left and right. It is something that is in many ways contributing to the decline of democracy and the decay of society, right? So it's a hugely important topic, yet nobody understands it. It's not taught in schools. Children have no idea about it. Nobody's ever read a privacy policy anymore, right? And so I think this education is extremely important. And as a company in the privacy space, Proton, we don't just have an obligation to protect. We have an obligation also to educate. The past incident, if anything, has really, I think, shed light on the fact that we as a security industry need to do more to enhance education. That's the motivation behind the series, and that's also why it's general, right? We want to talk about concepts that are not specific to ProtonMail, but specific to to privacy in general, because it is a general topic, and it is something that I think the general population needs education on. So we also want to make it accessible, right? We don't want to write at a level that no one can understand. It needs to be accessible, but it needs to take these very complicated topics and distill it down in a way that is useful and effective and protective, to the common citizen.
Andy, is there anything else coming up? What's next for ProtonMail? What are you guys excited about? What do we have to look forward to over the next year?
We've had a lot of things going on in cooking here in Switzerland. We've also had, of course, our fair share of distractions, which is never, very helpful, right? On my side, of course, we are trying to focus the team on delivering, new products, services, and better features and better quality of services to users, right? I think I myself am frustrated that we haven't been able to release as much and as often as we wanted to. I think a lot of users share that frustration as well. That's something that I feel, of course, and we do want to try to accelerate and get more things out there. But at the same time, due to the sensitivity of what we're building, due to the threats our users are facing, due to the security models and threat models we need to defend against, we need to be extremely careful in everything that we do, right? It's not like a regular tech company that can afford to have a data breach, afford to make a mistake on their encryption. These are not mistakes that us as an organization or our users individually can really afford to have. So it requires us to take, I think, a much higher level and standard of care compared to other tech companies out there. And this means that we need to do things, in a more deliberate and careful way, which is going to be slower. That's for sure going to be, the case. But going forward, I think this year we have now taken our web app and we've released it to a new version with a new UI and UX, right? The same work is being done now on the mobile apps, and those are taking longer than we expected because we have completely rewritten and redesigned them to be more secure. It's a lot of work, but we do have those coming around the corner quite quickly. We'll probably see iOS before we see Android on the mail side. Of course, on Calendar, We want to get the mobile apps out there. As I mentioned earlier, it's perhaps the most complex product that we've ever built from an encryption standpoint. So, auditing that, testing that, checking that is a huge amount of work. But we are quite close to getting there. And, I'm confident that probably, hopefully by the end of this year, we can get the Android, out of beta and fully released to everybody. Then, of course, also coming close behind that is Proton Drive. There's quite a few users actually that are already starting to use it because it is available today for paid users. But we really want to get that on all platforms. We want to have better support for photos. We want to have that on desktop. So there's kind of a whole avalanche of features that are coming, very quickly, in the background that will be seeing the light of day, hopefully in the next 3 to 6 months. And then on the VPN side, we continue to develop, right? It's actually a little bit insane if you think about all the things that we're doing. As a small company, that's a huge number of projects. But I'm also happy that on the VPN, we've made tremendous progress. The announcement actually came out earlier this week. We have, fully released WireGuard support now to the entire world. It was in beta for 3 months, which is actually a pretty short beta as far as Proton is concerned. And we're happy to do that in a, secure and audited way. So I think a lot of things happening. Thanks to all the users and people in the community for their patience. We understand you want us to be faster, and we are definitely working on that.
Dr. Andy Yen, he is the CEO and founder of ProtonMail, making the internet more secure, starting with email. You can learn more at protonmail.com. Dr. Andy Yen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. You always have an open invitation. We'll get you back on the program real soon.
Great. Thanks for having me.
In the news this week, the PinePhone Pro is here. The PinePhone Pro costs just $399 plus whatever shipping and import taxes you have. For that, you're going to get a 6-inch display, 1440 by 720 in-cell IPS display protected by Gorilla Glass. It's powered by a 6-core Rockchip RK3399S, a 64-bit SoC running at 1.5 gigahertz, a 4-core ARM Mali T860 GPU running at 500 megahertz, and that's complemented by 4 gigabytes of LPDDR RAM and 128 gigabytes of eMMC flash storage. So you can compare this to your mid-range Android phone. On the rear of the phone, you're going to get a 4G LTE phone, a 13 megapixel Sony IMX258 camera. On the front, a 5 megapixel selfie camera. Charging is accomplished via USB Type-C, which includes support for a 15-watt fast charging and a 3,000 milliamp Samsung battery. There's also an optional micro SD card slot and a headphone jack. It takes courage to put a headphone jack in phones these days. Now, if you depend on any sort of proprietary mainstream application, obviously this is not the phone for you. This is going to ship running Manjaro Linux, Manjaro ARM, using the KDE Plasma desktop environment. Now, I would tell you this. I have a Pine phone. I also have a Pine Book, and I have a Pine Book Pro. I would tell you that unequivocally, Pine absolutely delivers a tremendous amount of value over what you spend. So if you spend $399, I'm convinced you're getting twice that much phone. And if all I get out of my PinePhone Pro, which I absolutely ordered and so did my wife, if all we get out of that is a more robust experience than the experience we're already getting on our Pine phones, then that's successful. But the fact that Pine is able to do this just a year after shipping the Pine phone, this is absolutely fantastic. The Pine Phone Pro is designed to be user repairable. It's designed to be able to swap spare parts. And it's sold, of course, in the Pine store. You can learn more at pine64.com. It's a highly configurable handset. It runs Linux, the default operating system. Absolutely fantastic. A huge thanks to Pine for putting this out. And Ubuntu 2110 is out. It is bringing a developer focus and, of course, GNOME 40. And so it makes its way onto the scene this week. With the focus of developers, the all-new PHP 8 and GCC 11 work out of the box with this version. PHP 8 was released in June of this year and is one of the most exciting features in the conclusion of just-in-time, the just-in-time compiler. So 2110 brings version 5.3 of the Linux kernel, adding support for kernel electronic fence or KFence. as well as keeping the overhead low while still detecting most common memory errors. It's also enabled by default, and 2110 will randomize the memory location of the kernel stack at each system call entry on both ARM64 and AMD 64. So 2110 is available for download. You can get it for x86. You can also get images for the Raspberry Pis. Check that out at ubuntu.com. Steve, anything else before we close out the hour tonight?
No, I think we covered all of the emails, and we'd like to get more emails, actually. It's nice to get a nice string of themed emails in, and so we're asking again for if you have some sort of theme that you'd like or some sort of topic. It would be nice to kind of get, hey, Noah, maybe we can do some sort of polling eventually where we can send people to a website and be like, hey, here's the things we're thinking about talking about. Which one do you want to talk about next?
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. Yeah, we'll have to work on that a little bit. But for now, if you send in an email, we structure the show around your feedback. So send an email live at asknoahshow.com. Steve goes through those meticulously every week. And of course, if we find a couple of emails that address kind of the same idea, then we turn that into a segment and we can serve the community better. But it all starts with you sending an email. Music in our ears means we're out of time. We'll be back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central, asknoahshow.com. Have a good week.